There are a lot of historical forces people like to credit for shaping the 1990s. Globalization, the dot-com boom, the slow death of the mall. But I maintain the decade was really held together by two things: clear telephones with colored wires inside them, and the sacred institution of the slumber party. If you were a boy, the girls' slumber party was one of those mythical things. All you'd ever hear from boys was the great mystery of so many females sharing a room for a night. And from there, all kinds of urban legends sprouted, mostly involving lesbianism, comparing breast sizes, flashing each other's panties, and even exploring each other's bodies. Sorry, didn't happen. If you wanted latent homosexuality and experimentation, you had to go to a boys' slumber party. At least if my brother's slumber parties were anything to go by. Because every slumber party I ever went to or hosted was totally civil. As a girl who hit her teens in the 1990s, you're going to hear it from the horse's mouth. There was no lesbianism, no flirting with sexuality, just a fun night in for the girls. Now, if movies are anything to go by, you'd imagine a slumber party was some grand event, planned for months, if not years in advance. It was like a gala evening or some embassy ball, pedicured and polished to perfection, with no detail left to chance. Actually, it was usually pretty impromptu. Sometimes I just turned to my best friends, Erica and Melissa, one day at school and ask if they'd want to come over for the night, and they'd say either, yeah, sure, or nah, I've got plans. It wasn't always totally ad-libbed. On special occasions, we'd plan way ahead of time, normally a few weeks in advance, just to ensure we had that particular evening free, and from then it was deciding on what movie to watch, what candy to bring in, what anyone would like for dinner, and stuff like that. The venue was never a single place, and we'd often share between my house, Erica's house, and Melissa's house. We had a cycle where after slumber parties at my house, we'd then go to Erica's, and from there, we'd go to Melissa's, before heading back to my place. That was for the prepared slumber parties. For the spur-of-the-moment ones, it could be at any of our places. Our parents always partook in the planning for the prepared slumber parties. But for the impromptu ones, they were usually pretty eager to help out. The only time they would show exception or set rules would be on work nights, as the last thing our parents needed were three giggling teenage girls chattering away late into the night when they're trying to sleep. We appreciated that, and so we would usually set our slumber parties for Friday evenings. On occasion, especially when revising for tests, a late night of studying would turn into an on-the-spot sleepover for one of the girls. For instance, Melissa was once helping me prepare a big joint project we were doing and stayed far too late. We looked down from the clock at something like 6:30 p.m., and when we looked back up, it was nearly 11. My parents would have alerted her to this, but we were working so quietly that they'd completely forgotten she was in my room. Anyway, we decided that she could spend the night and come to school with me in the morning. So we laid out an airbed and a sleeping bag, and Melissa would just sleep in her undies on my bedroom floor. A simple solution to a simple problem. Anyway, for the more adventurous slumber parties, where Melissa and Erica would come over to my house at the same time, the setup was normally very casual, and we liked it that way. I didn't have many friends growing up, and Erica and Melissa were my closest confidants, so we were already very comfortable with each other's boundaries and habits. For my parents, they would very kindly put on dinner for all three of us, and Erica and Melissa never had an issue with sitting down for a family dinner alongside my parents and my younger brother. They just settled in as part of the family for the night. Melissa's house was similar. She had an older sister who was one cool dude of a girl. She was so laid back she was practically lying down and was always very eager to help push our slumber parties into the daring territory. But more on that later. Melissa's parents were absolutely loaded. They lived in this fantastic house on Vallejo Street, which was 4 floors high and had this really cool circular dome room at the top, which was her sister's bedroom and private escape. If there was a piece of technology or fashion item at the top of the market and was only weeks old, Melissa had it first. Thankfully, she wasn't a snob about it, at least not to us. She had the capacity to be snobby if she wanted to. With her long, flowing blonde hair that put my yellow mop to shame, all the latest fashion from all the finest stores, and a permanent place on the cheerleading squad. She was looks, style, and substance. And I guess I was quietly jealous of her when we first met as kids. But I soon put that aside when I realized life's too short to compare oneself with others. Anyway, getting back to this story, a slumber party at Erica's was something I wish we'd caught on camera, because trying to slot in Melissa and me alongside 3 other sisters and a brother was like trying to run a Barnum and Bailey circus. but the animals could think for themselves and were notoriously catty. Erica's older sisters, Elise and Eliza, were famous in their street for their never-ending fights and verbal battles, and getting them to behave with guests was an exercise in futility. I lost count of how many times I'd walk through the front door with Erica, and the first thing we'd hear are profanities and screaming from upstairs, while their mother tried in vain to restore some kind of temporary order. Compounding the problem was that Erica's sisters, especially Elise and Eliza, didn't really like me. They saw me as some kind of uptight, snobby artist, just like Erica, who was quietly judging them on some silent, intellectual level. Truth be told, the only thing I was judging them on was their endless squabbling over nothing, like they were fighting for the last piece of free space on the planet. Anyway, we wouldn't sit at the table for that one, like a family. Erica's parents would cook us up something simple, and we'd sit on the couch and eat it off trays while the rest of her family sat down for dinner at the table. Honestly, Erica's parents never made me feel unwelcome. Her dad and my dad had a friendly rivalry over their jobs, their golf skills, their choice of cars. But it was never hostile. Erica's mom would desperately seek advice from my mom over how to resolve the angst issues between the elder sisters. But my mom really couldn't suggest anything. It was just something they would have to figure out themselves after a lot of bad noise and hormone-fueled rage. Anyway, on a Friday evening, the arrival time was usually just before dinner. If prepared, they would be greeted by our parents and led upstairs to my bedroom, where my mom would have already laid out the airbeds neatly on my floor. For the impromptu visits, I'd come gingerly into the house with either Erica or Melissa after school, slink quietly over to my mom in the kitchen, and greet her in the usual manner, and then, very nervously, ask if Erica or Melissa could stay the night. I wasn't nervous because my mom would yell at me or anything like that. I was nervous because I got myself all psyched for an evening with my friends, and I didn't like the idea of my bubble being burst. My mom was always good-natured about it, and if they couldn't stay over, she'd let us down gently, and we'd simply say our goodbyes, and that would be the end of the matter. Normally, her answer was a yes, though, and after a quick hug of thanks, we'd rush upstairs to my room to get the airbed pumped up and deploy one of our family sleeping bags from the attic. In the Marina District, dinner was never just dinner. It was a ritual to keep three girls from combusting with anticipation. It was the last official checkpoint before the night became ours. My mom would do something easy and hearty, pizza, spaghetti, sometimes those soft tacos where everyone made their own and dropped half the lettuce on the plate, and then insisted it didn't count. Like I said, my parents allowed Erica and Melissa to become part of the family dinner. We'd set 2 extra places, and we'd spend the time talking eagerly about whatever had happened in the day. Sometimes, much to my surprise, Erica and Melissa would ask about my dad and mom's work, with Melissa once getting deeply interested in my dad's explanation of cutting-edge glaucoma treatment. Not something we expected from the trendy, rich cheerleader from Pacific Heights. Then came washing up, which was the price of freedom. We'd stand shoulder to shoulder at the sink, sleeves pushed up, hands smelling like dish soap, arguing over who had to do what in the unserious way that only kids can manage. Erica would pretend she couldn't touch gross plates, acting like a tiny Victorian aristocrat confronted with a muddy boot. Melissa would insist she was actually good at drying, which meant she liked the job where she could stand back and comment on everyone else's technique. I'd assign myself the role of supervisor while doing the least work possible, because being host felt like it came with executive privileges. The clink of forks and the warm steam from the sink were part of the soundtrack. And the whole time, we were already mentally in the next room where the real night waited. Every plate we stacked felt like a step closer to the part we cared about. Like chores were just toll booths on the highway to fun. Straight after dinner, it was up to the bathroom for washing. Now, for all you boys in the audience, this is the part where you hope we'd throw off our clothes and start, kissing each other. I'm afraid not. Bathing was always very civil. I'd let Erica and Melissa have their baths or showers first, and we would venture into the bathroom one at a time. Specifically, one at a time. We were great friends, but we were not so close that we would be comfortable in each other's presence without clothes on. Melissa always dibbed the bathroom first, running a hot, deep bath that nearly overflowed and then lying there for nearly half an hour while Erica and I sat in my bedroom talking about stuff. We knew Melissa was the pampered princess of Pacific Heights, but we didn't mind, and according to her sister, we got off lightly. At home, Melissa would apparently stay in the bathtub until it went cold, and sometimes even fell asleep in it, which is why she had her own ensuite bathroom in her bedroom. Eventually, after a few million years, she would emerge from the bathroom, and Erica would go in next. Erica was usually pretty quick. She'd refill the hot water, have a quick splash to wash herself, and then be out in no more than 10 minutes. She always told me it was simply because she didn't like the idea of long baths, but I think it's because she was so accustomed to fighting for space and time in her house with all her siblings that short baths and showers were just part of the way of life. Then I'd go in myself, and like Erica, I'd keep it short. This wasn't because I was afraid Erica and Melissa would sneak through my stuff while I wasn't looking. They were a mite more honest than that, but simply because I'd be a fine host if I didn't spend as much time with my guests as possible. So, we were out of the bath, drying our hair in my bedroom. This was usually a time for quiet conversations about various things, be it at school, at home, or in the wider world. We were all kind of slow at this point, the heat of the bath having put us in a lethargic mood for a few minutes. But we weren't rushing. At some point, a magazine would come out. No, not a dirty magazine. Erica would produce it with a magician's flourish, and we'd huddle like conspirators, flipping pages as if the paper might catch fire. The glossy pages smelled like perfume and rebellion. There would be a sealed section or a headline that sounded scandalous, and we'd giggle like we understood everything while understanding approximately nothing. We'd say, "Oh my God," in horrified delight, which is the official emotional posture of being 12. We'd point at a sentence, read it out loud, and then dissolve into laughter, not because it was funny, but because it was strange and grown up, and we were thrilled to be near it. We'd make faces like we were scandalized, and then keep reading. Someone would swear never to tell anyone. We would, of course, tell everyone at school by Monday, but in a vague way that made it sound even more dramatic. One of the best things about a 1990s slumber party was the lack of technology. Aside from the computer in my dad's office and the car phone inside his Acura Legend, there were no cell phones, no social media, no YouTube and TikTok videos, no AI-generated videos of golden retrievers doing backflips. Girls of the 2020s might ask those of the 1990s how they could have survived. We survived by talking, by interacting. Rather than spending our nights staring at phones waiting for someone to update their status, thereby meaning we could update our own, we played music, watched movies, ate nachos, and drank cola. It was totally analog, and we never for a moment appreciated what we had back then. The movie was a central figure of our evening. All three of us girls were TV junkies, and we loved it. We didn't just watch movies, we lived them. From an early age, all three of us had bonded over our love of cinema, admiring filmmaking, screenplay, cinematography, and more. We picked apart the subtext of the plot, the subtle hints of characters, a twitch here, a shrug there. Unlike modern movies, where what's on screen has to be spelled out for you by some obnoxious voiceover, classic cinema was more about what was done rather than what was said. We enjoyed our mindless blockbusters, sure, but a slumber party night for the three of us was a chance to put on something intelligent and meaningful. However, when Erica was involved, controversial could be added to that list. Erica's most distinct taste in movies were European art films, specifically French and Italian ones. Even if they weren't in English, she'd watch them, even if the VHS she had didn't have any subtitles. She wanted the mood, the angles, the stories, the fact that unlike our prudest American sensitivities, European movies would dive deep into the harsh and often uncomfortable realities of life, such as growing up, sexuality, relationships, heartbreak, deception, betrayal, and all those other cheerful topics that you wouldn't find playing at mainstream movie theaters across the United States. Even if these films got so explicit they bordered on pornography, she'd still watch them, but her opportunities to watch them were slim, especially at home. So, after roping Melissa and me into her cinematic interests, we'd watch them together during what we like to call Masochist Movie Nights. The routine was this: Melissa's older sister, being over 18, would rent an X-rated movie from the rental store on our behalf. Usually because half of these titles were hidden away behind a curtain in the porn section. Then, at Melissa's house, where she had her own TV set in her bedroom with a VCR, we'd settle down with some popcorn or candy bars and make our way through some of the most violent, explicit, and otherwise dark films ever put to screen. Some of the titles we chose were mainstream: Scarface with Al Pacino, Risky Business, Basic Instinct, A Clockwork Orange, and so on. She even made us endure the insane collision of Shakespearean actors and genitals that was Caligula. Yeah, that was a really unpleasant watch. Not because of all the sex and violence on screen, but because it was actually really, really boring. After the first 20 minutes of watching people engage in every sexual depravity imaginable, you kind of get desensitized to it, and your brain knows that the next 3 hours are just going to be much of the same. Melissa's sister really got into it, though, but she was over 18, so we just assumed her mind had become addled by weird adult intrusions. For another example, over the course of multiple slumber parties, we watched Ralph Bakshi's entire body of work, one by each. And man, that was a weird experience. If you want to make yourself feel drunk without touching a drop of liquor, these movies are your answer. We had the full spectrum. The quote-unquote family-friendly features like Wizards and The Lord of the Rings, which were, okay, I guess, nothing special. The deranged experiments of strangeness, like Cool World and Heavy Traffic. And of course the controversial Fritz the Cat. Honestly, though, if you want the best of Bakshi, watch Coonskin. This is an amazing movie. If you want something that not only captures a moment in American history, the mid-1970s in New York, while also providing a wonderful cross-section and caricature of race relations, mobsters and their crimes, religious leaders selling false promises in exchange for poor people's cash, politicians, hypocrisy, police brutality, and American society at large. While everyone focuses on Fritz the Cat as Bakshi's most famous movie, it's not his best, and gets a free pass simply because of its lasting controversy. But if you want a movie with guts, grit, great characters, and a message that is just as relevant now as it was back then, Coonskin should top your must-watch list. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. However, the descent began with Erica's rare and strange European oddities. She was a particular fan of Bernardo Bertolucci, and I think we traveled through his debauched body of work at least twice during our many Masochist Movie Nights. There was Last Tango in Paris, which was an interesting exercise in power dynamics, but Erica really had to explain herself after the butter scene, because Melissa and I were just about ready to turn the movie off, but we continued through to the end. Then there was The Conformist, which was a very confusing movie, but I did really enjoy the atmosphere of it, capturing the essence of fascist Italy and the descent into personal madness caused by the interpersonal relationships of the film. However, if you want a lesson in endurance, try watching all 5 hours and 19 minutes of Novecento. This movie takes the concept of the epic to an entirely new level, and with it comes a depiction of sadism, decadence, and the divisions of class in 1920s Italy that will probably send the casual viewer's head right into the nearest toilet. Based on the story of two friends, one from the aristocracy, the other from the peasantry, this film doesn't cut anyone slack. It's a hard film to get through. It's violent, it's debauched, it's insane, it's poetic. It has a performance by Donald Sutherland so intense and vile that Sutherland himself was sickened by it. And if you're a true movie lover, you have to watch it. We sat through the full, uncut, uncensored version, starting at 8 p.m., and not finishing until long after midnight. But we were so captivated by it. It's a film that has to be seen to be believed. Anyway, going back to slumber parties, how did we handle our siblings? For my brother, Tony, we usually let him join us if he wanted to. We'd watch the movie together. He'd sit in my bedroom with us. Sometimes he'd be playful, sometimes he'd be friendly, but he was never a disruption. Melissa found Tony very cute and would insist he join us every time, while Erica, having her own younger brother, didn't mind him being around and knew Tony well enough to behave himself. As for Erica's siblings, her older sisters didn't want anything to do with us. They didn't like me, as I mentioned, and they didn't care much for Melissa either, seeing her as just another blonde bimbo. So we'd seek sanctuary in Erica's bedroom, reading magazines, and talking long into the night. Sometimes, Erica's younger sister, Esme, and her brother Elijah would knock on the door and ask to join us when Elise and Eliza started fighting. We'd let Esme join us in our girlish antics. And since she was a younger girl than us, we'd sometimes play with her hair and put on a silly, impromptu fashion show. Elijah, meanwhile, would sit with his Star Wars magazine at the foot of the bed and keep to himself. He was one quiet boy, and I remember this time where we turned out the lights to go to sleep, not realizing he was still in there, so we had to turn the lights back on to let him out when he said he couldn't find the door. Speaking of lights out, you may think that we stayed up well after midnight, daring each other to see who would run out of energy first. Sorry to disappoint again, but that wasn't us. We all valued our beauty sleep, and we would always be in bed and asleep before 12. Usually, we'd feel our conversation running out, or the movie would come to an end, and we'd simply agree that now was the time to head to bed, and after quickly doing our teeth, we'd slip under our sheets, turn out the light, and lie in bed talking about things like the film we just watched or absurd philosophy. Basically where we'd come up with deliberately ridiculous philosophical garbage to gauge each other's reactions. At Erica's, particularly prolonged fights between the older sisters would keep us up, and it wasn't unknown for the normally monotone and calm Erica to jump out of bed, march over to the door, and shout, "Shut the hell up! God damn it!" Finally, we drifted off to sleep. I've got to confess, waking up in the night during a sleepover was a strange thing. As a girl used to having her room to herself, the idea of having either one or two other people asleep in the room with me was a curious feeling. I know this is going to sound weird, but hearing them breathing, rustling in the night as they rolled over, it made me kinda philosophical. These were two other human beings with their own lives, dreaming their own dreams, snoozing away quietly. It felt very intimate in a way, and I know you probably think I'm a creep for saying this, but I found it kind of fascinating during those dark hours of the night when I was awake and they weren't. Anyway, morning finally broke, usually on a Saturday, and there wouldn't be some grand awakening. Instead, we'd just slowly drift back into consciousness. One of us would normally wake up before the other two and would probably head to the bathroom, at which point we would be awoken ourselves. Other times, we just lay there silently staring up at the ceiling, either aware or unaware that the others might have been awake too. Eventually, a rustle of fabric or a particularly loud yawn would garner our attention, and we'd start talking in slurred voices about how we slept, our dreams, what we planned to do that day, or if we'd all slept really well, we'd communicate entirely in grunts and sighs. Once, we did play a prank on Melissa, where Erica and I hid my alarm clock inside her sleeping bag as she slept, and then watched with mischief as she was woken up with shock at the sound of its deafening ring. She took it well, simply saying that we were really funny girls. From there, a sort of deadlock would come across the room. None of us would elect to be the first to the bathroom, nor would we fight for it. One of us would simply say, "I gotta use the bathroom," and that would be it. She'd get up, wander out of the door in bare feet and with her underwear in hand, while those still inside my bedroom would lie there talking on as we waited for our turn. Often enough, we'd head downstairs in our pajamas or nighties and pour ourselves a bowl of cereal, working around our siblings and parents. Sometimes, we'd sit at the dining table to have our cereal. Other times, we'd sit on the couch in the living room, my brother watching his slew of Saturday morning cartoons. If my parents were in a generous mood, they'd throw together some pancakes. There would be orange juice poured into mismatched cups. There would be someone insisting they weren't hungry and then eating 2 pancakes. Breakfast was usually where we decided what to do next. Our normal routine was to spend the Saturday together. We'd get dressed and then head out into the city, invading the mall, walking around in Golden Gate Park, doing whatever we liked to do back then. Sometimes, especially for the improvised slumber parties, we simply had to part right after breakfast if we had plans for the day. It was all very simple. We'd pack up the sleeping bags, say our goodbyes, and thank the parents for letting us stay, and then head off back to our houses. That was it. No tearful farewells, like we'd never see each other again, because we always knew there would be another time, another experience, another set of memories to make. Slumber parties were something we really took for granted because when they ended, we barely noticed. I honestly can't remember the last time we did it, but it was around the time we were 18 years old. It was before we finished school, that's for sure. Despite the fact, that slumber parties had become such a cornerstone of our youths, the final times went largely unnoticed, and then a decade later, we found ourselves asking, what happened, and how come we didn't do that again? I guess it's simply the case that when adulthood comes creeping into your lives, just like puberty itself, you never notice the changes. Those juvenile attitudes and ideas of friends innocently coming over for dinner, a movie and a night sleeping on their bedroom floor just slipped quietly out of our heads. But in the 1990s, a sleepover wasn't simply a night away from bedtime rules. It was a tiny civilization built from flannel pajamas and pop music and sugar, held together by giggles and secrets and the shared refusal to be the first one to fall asleep. It was a place where we practiced being older while still clutching the parts of being little, where we learned how to host and how to apologize, and how to keep a secret for at least 12 hours. In the Marina District, with Erica and Melissa, it felt like we were doing something bigger than we were. Like we were practicing adulthood, but with more Doritos and less dignity, more bold declarations and fewer consequences. And honestly, it was perfect. Not because it was flawless, but because it was ours. A whole night carved out of ordinary life and filled up to the brim.
Come along, let's sing, where the joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 1990s, we're here just for you.